All right, on this episode of Bowks Talking Bouts, very excited to be chatting with an individual competing at PFL 6 as part of their 2024 regular season, which goes down on June the 28th. And in a co-main event bout in the welterweight ranks, we have Logan Storley taking on Laureano Staropoli, and very excited to have Logan on the show to talk a bit about that. How are you doing, man? You having a good day so far?
Yeah, doing well. We're 4 weeks out from Friday and just been training and getting ready.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting sort of environment in a particular regard, just with PFL making its South Dakota debut and everything like that. Like, I mean, obviously a fight's a fight and you're focused on the direct variables in the actual contest itself, but is there something to getting to compete in South Dakota here?
Yeah, I've competed at home probably 6, 7 times before. Got to compete there 2, 3 times with Bellator, LFA. So, it's a lot of fun to get to go home, perform in front of your friends, family, people that support you, and so it's cool to get to do it for PFL's first time.
I think you were there like not really all that long ago. Like I think earlier part of December or maybe even end of November, it looked like you were hosting a youth wrestling camp at that specific venue, the Sanford Pentagon. So it seems like there's even direct familiarity with the actual venue.
Yeah, no, I've been there, many times and ran camps there and fights, and so it's a lot of fun and undefeated at home, and so I'm excited to go in there and continue that.
Yeah, and I've gotten to speak to you during your Bellator tenure before, but haven't really got to touch base as much since you've transitioned into PFL competition. Like, how much has that kind of changed for you? Like, does it kind of feel like same, large in part, or are there certain distinct differences you notice competing within PFL?
I think it's pretty much the same thing. The biggest difference is it's a season format, and you're going to be more active. You're going to have more fights back to back. And the playoff system, point system. That's definitely different. But besides that, it's all the same thing.
And is that something you're kind of used to in a particular regard? Like, I mean, you obviously come from that wrestling kind of lineage, which is so entrenched in the idea of competing in tournaments. But I mean, MMA different in certain regards. And I guess I've also heard some people kind of talk about the PFL season structure in a way where it's kind of arduous and they have to really adapt to it. Like, do you find yourself not comfortable per se, but is there a certain, level of anecdotal experience that benefits you within the PFL structure and all?
Yeah, I've spent most of my from 5 to 22 years old competing in seasons with wrestling and staying really active, a lot of competitions, tournaments, and there's something completely different about fighting. It's not a wrestling match. So you're going to get a little more beat up, but we got 10 weeks usually in between fights. So I've been there and kind of done that as far as wrestling style, and now just kind of putting it all into over to the MMA side and being ready to go. Every 10 weeks you're up, and it's also nice knowing your schedule, knowing you're gonna fight. You have to make weight. You have to be able to peak at the right time. So I'm excited for it and continue, and excited to go in there and get a W and move forward in these playoffs.
Yeah, and it's so interesting in that regard because as much as the first PFL foray you had this season didn't necessarily pan out how you wanted to against Shamil Musaev, I mean, just the way they have it set up, I mean, if you get like a big first round finish, say, I mean, you could position yourself very well within the 170-pound hierarchy. So just very interesting to follow along with what PFL does in that regard too.
Yeah, the matchups, and like I'm gonna need probably 5 or 6 points, and you're also going to need a little help, from other people along the way, that an upset here or a win here to push you forward in those playoffs. The biggest thing for me is just focusing on that fight in front of me on Friday night and taking care of that first. And you have no control over what's going on in other fights.
Yeah, for sure. I guess you can just focus on what's within your immediate control and everything like that. And it's kind of curious because as much as you're kind of familiarized with the field and as far as like who has what amount of points, like there's a certain almost lack of familiarity as far as like who could be your immediate next opponent. So it must be kind of interesting in that regard. I mean, as much as you have like a definitive, like pretty busy kind of schedule, like maybe you don't find yourself getting overly preoccupied with who might be someone you're facing down the line, I suppose.
Yeah, I would say most guys are probably focused on what's ahead of them, because we don't know what the point structure will look like and who you're going to have next. And, for me right now, the biggest thing is to get yourself into those playoffs and give yourself a shot. And so that's really what I'm focused on right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I've known you to work at Killcliff FC a fair bit and whatnot. Is that kind of still where you're mainly honing the skills and everything?
Yep. So I've been down here for 8 years now, and so that's home base. And it's been great, and really enjoy the coaching staff and the training partners. And I think we got the best gym in the world. So it's gone really well.
Yeah, and I've seen some recent posts on social media where, I mean, this isn't like verbatim relaying what was posted per se, but the sentiment was basically talking about how much growth you've been having, but also having a great deal of fun amid that. Like, how important is that confluence of just those two factors and everything in your growth?
Yeah, we got really good guys, and it's a great atmosphere. Robbie Lawler, he's kind of taken over as my head coach, and he's a good friend of mine. So that's a lot of fun. And then you also got younger guys, former Gophers with Michael Blockus, Mitch McKee coming down, transitioning from wrestling to MMA, and so it's been a lot of fun, and continuing to grow those skills. And this is a tough way to make a living, fighting, and so yeah, you definitely want to try to enjoy it as much as you can, and while also getting better.
Yeah, and you mentioned Robbie. I mean, kind of an interesting time for him because, I mean, you obviously have a tremendous amount of anecdotal training experience with him, but also getting to be cage side for his MMA swan song. It seems like maybe he's potentially looking at a BKFC move. So, I mean, some interesting sort of times for Robbie Lawler, it would seem like.
Yeah, I think Rob's just doing him right now and hanging out and coaching a lot, and so we'll see what's next. Obviously, I think the greatest retirement send off in the history of the sport, and so we'll see kind of what he wants to do next.
Yeah, a lot of great potential options for him as well. But just, yeah, such an interesting career to follow for you because I was seeing an article kind of recently where, like, when you kind of began your MMA career, and this is kind of tying it back into the South Dakota connectivity, like, there wasn't even like a sanctioned, formally instantiated commission in the state. Like, when you decided to get in the sport, like, is it kind of crazy to even think of the growth even in that like localized kind of way, just with, South Dakota specific?
Yeah, a lot of places back in the day didn't have commissions. The amateur fights and pro fights, we didn't really have that to see where it's come to today. With they've had a couple Bellator shows, a UFC show, um, and it's always sold out, great crowds, and now we have a decent amount of fighters that have came out of South Dakota. Me and Brock, um, both being from Webster, South Dakota, so it's pretty cool to see how it's all ended up, and I think the sport's in a great place in South Dakota.
Yeah, for sure, man. And just looking at this next opponent here, like I was kind of saying before, a somewhat quick turnaround between the last fight in April and what you're getting up to with this one. But just what are your thoughts on maybe some of the stylistic attributes that you have seen in your upcoming opponent, Laureano Staropoli, because he kind of came off that PFL Europe circuit after an Aries FC run, former UFC competitor as well. Like, what are your thoughts on, I guess, his overall resume and some of the better stylistic attributes you may have seen from him?
Yeah, no, he's a tough opponent. He has good kicks, really good kicks. He comes from weird angles with his hands, puts things together well. You're gonna need to be sharp, make sure you see everything, take the fight to where you want to, and got to be smart. With a guy like that kind of throws stuff from wild angles and has good kicks.
Yeah, for sure. And someone, I mean, just kind of even talking about some of those attributes there. I mean, maybe a different approach, but just even talking about some of the different angles and stuff like that. I mean, you obviously got to fight Michael Venom Page in Bellator and claim championship hardware when you were doing that. I'm curious if you've kind of like gotten to, see what he's been able to do just kind of with his transition to the UFC. And I guess maybe as an extension of that, like some thoughts on his looming fight that he has coming up against Ian Gary at UFC 303 that has been getting some discussion.
Yeah, obviously we fought, and I was able to go out there and really put just a tough grinding style of a guy who was that talented on his feet. He look what he did to Kevin Holland. So I was able to get to my wrestling, really dominate those positions. Him and Ian Gary, Ian Gary used to train with us. It's going to be a really interesting fight. Both very good stand up, different styles with their stand up. MVP's I think faster, obviously. But Ian has really good kicks, good calf kicks, a good head kick. And he's long too. So I'm really intrigued to see how that fight plays out.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely interesting stuff. And I feel like this is the classic question that a lot of the people in the PFL field kind of get asked. And I feel like I might even know the answer to the question, but kind of thought to pose it to you. Like with that $1 million prize at the very end, like have you given any level of thought to what you would do with that? Like I guess the thing I assumed is you would kind of allocate that to the training and etc. Like use it to kind of even forward yourself to that next level. But is that something you find yourself thinking of at all? Like how you might allocate that prize money if you get your desired outcome through the season and playoffs and all?
Yeah, I think obviously when I started fighting, the point was to use this short time we have to fight is to set yourself out for the future and be smart with your money. And if you didn't want to work afterwards, and good investments, that's how I've always done it. And so gives you freedom. I think to really live your life and go compete a little more freely. If you want to continue to fight, and so that's really for me how I look at it is to set yourself up and also get that championship gold.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the more, I guess, intriguing facets of PFL competition that I usually ask fighters about who've come from other organizations, like how different is it for you, if at all, just like the lack of elbows involved and everything? Like, do you have to like curate your training differently? Is it something you have to be particularly conscious of while you're fighting? Or would you say it's like a kind of a non-factor or like a negligible factor almost?
Yeah, it's tough for me on top. Where you do a lot of damage, ground and pound, but you also know kind of before that, hey, you can't do this, and I don't even know. Maybe you lose a point in the second one, or you could get DQ'd. So you kind of know going in, and you're smart about that, and you really want to give yourself the best opportunity. And all of a sudden, if you throw an elbow or cut them and get DQ'd, well, cost you money and points. So I think it's just something you get used to.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, definitely an interesting sort of thing to see, though, just with like, having the acquisition, PFL kind of acquiring Bellator, and just, I mean, you were one of those guys coming over that I thought would be one of the more interesting acquisitions for sure. And yeah, cool to follow this welterweight field and everything. But I also appreciate you making the time, Logan. And kind of like I was saying before, want to be mindful of your time and your schedule too, man. So in saying that, do you maybe have like a final parting thought you were wanting to add as we're wrapping up here, man?
No, just I think excited for June 28th and get back in there and get a W. So what I'm preparing for and looking forward to.
Yeah, it's going to be a good win against Laureano Staropoli. And again, like I said, really appreciate you making the time. I'm going to be checking out those fights when they go down. But until then, Logan, you have a good rest of your day. And yeah, thanks so much for the time.
All right, take care.